The courtroom was electric, every eye fixed, every breath caught in suspended anticipation. A low murmur rippled across the benches as lawyers shuffled papers and whispered under their breaths. But the tension was palpable, a storm gathering behind the oak-paneled walls. Jasmine Crockett stood at the front, calm, composed, yet every fiber of the room seemed to lean toward her, drawn by the gravity of what was about to unfold. The air itself seemed charged, heavy with expectation, the kind of moment where history feels present in every heartbeat. And then, Judge Stevens spoke. His voice, usually measured and steady, cut through the murmurs like a lightning strike. I must recognize a leadership that has not only met the demands of this court, but has redefined them. The words landed like a bombshell, reverberating through the room, echoing off the marble and wood. Heads turned, jaws dropped, some rising to their feet in stunned acknowledgement. No one expected the judge to single her out, especially not in a setting as formal, as rigid, as tradition-bound as this one. Whispers escalated into audible gasps. Colleagues who had opposed her policies stared in disbelief. Opponents who had mocked her dedication now sat frozen, unable to mask the flicker of respect or the flash of worry in their eyes. The gallery, packed with citizens, reporters, and advocates, leaned forward, sensing the tremor of something monumental. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, and the room seemed to pulse with the gravity of Judge Stevens' acknowledgement. It was more than recognition. It was validation of every late night, every compromise, every fight for justice that had brought Jasmine Crockett to this exact crossroads. Every smirk, every whisper of doubt from those who had underestimated her now collided with the undeniable truth. Here stood a leader whose moral clarity and unwavering courage could not be ignored. Yet beneath the applause, beneath the admiration, the room still held a tension that refused to dissipate. Eyes darted, hearts raced, and a quiet undercurrent of suspense threaded through every interaction. The moment hung suspended, delicate and powerful, as if the very walls themselves were waiting for the next revelation. But what happened next would leave the entire courtroom, and the nation, holding its breath. The weight of the moment pressed down on the courtroom like a storm on the horizon. This was not just another hearing, another routine proceeding where the rhythm of gavels and legal jargon dictated the day. No, this was a moment that could ripple far beyond these walls, touching policy, public opinion, and the very idea of what leadership could look like in America. Every person in that room felt it. Reporters poised with pens, clerks frozen mid-step, constituents holding their breath, and the nation outside, watching through screens and feeds, was unknowingly on the edge of its collective seat. For Jasmine Crockett, the stakes had been years in the making. Every late night spent poring over case files, every strategy meeting, every conversation with constituents, had built toward this exact moment. She had faced skepticism, both subtle and overt, whispers questioning her ability, her resolve, her very identity. And yet she had carried forward, guided by a principle that had become almost a mantra in her life: integrity, preparation, and courage under pressure. It was this relentless preparation, this unshakable commitment, that now placed her at the center of a courtroom moment that would not just test her, but test the very notion of justice in the eyes of the public. The political implications were immediate and unavoidable. Every policy she had championed, every bill she had defended, every speech she had delivered to advocate for equality and fairness, now hung in delicate balance. Opponents who had once dismissed her as a rising star too bold for their taste, now squirmed in their seats. Their attacks, their attempts to frame her as inexperienced or overreaching, now seemed hollow in the light of Judge Stevens' unexpected acknowledgement. What had begun as a procedural session had become a symbolic showdown. Competence and moral clarity versus arrogance and dismissal, truth against pretense, and yet the social resonance could not be understated. For countless Americans, particularly those who had watched their voices ignored, their struggles minimized, and their identities questioned, this moment represented more than a courtroom victory. It was a vindication. It was proof that leadership rooted in integrity could be recognized even in the most formal, rigid institutions. It was affirmation that representation, preparation, and resilience could change the narrative in a country still wrestling with the meaning of justice and equality. Every glance across the courtroom carried weight. Every pause in speech, every subtle nod from colleagues, Every restrained gasp from onlookers seemed amplified, reverberating far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Outside, social media feeds had begun to stir, threads forming like sparks along dry kindling, signaling that this was not a moment contained within the courtroom alone. The recognition of Jasmine Crockett's leadership was a beacon, signaling that the stakes were national, that every decision and every reaction would be watched, discussed, and remembered. As whispers spread through the crowd, it became clear that a defining moment was about to unfold. Across the polished mahogany table, the opposition sat with an air of self-assured arrogance, their confidence bordering on entitlement. They were the familiar faces of power, the ones who had long dominated the corridors of influence, politicians whose speeches rang hollow, legal adversaries whose reputations were built as much on intimidation as on competence, and advisors who thrived on optics and control rather than substance. To them, Jasmine Crockett was an anomaly, bold, prepared, and unwilling to bend to the scripts they had perfected over decades. That discomfort was evident in their expressions, a flicker of irritation that betrayed their unease, even as they attempted the mask of professional composure. Their histories were a tapestry of contradictions and failures, carefully hidden behind polished resumes and media soundbites. One of the senators had publicly decried bureaucratic inefficiency, while quietly benefiting from every loophole in government contracts. A high-profile attorney who now sat with a smug smile had once been reprimanded for misrepresenting evidence in a high-stakes case, a detail conveniently forgotten in their carefully curated public image. Another, a political strategist known for sharp rhetoric, had spent years undermining reform measures while claiming moral authority to lead. They were masters of performance, seasoned in manipulating narratives, but the very skills that had secured them influence were also the cracks in their armor. Cracks Jasmine Crockett had studied long before stepping into this courtroom. Every gesture and whisper among them revealed their underlying tension. The politician who drummed his fingers against the table seemed frustrated by the hero's composure, as if her very calmness was a personal affront. The attorney who leaned back in her chair, crossing arms, bore the subtle edge of condescension, confident in her ability to corner Crockett, to trip her with legal maneuvering. Even the junior associates, eager to prove themselves, carried the same mixture of awe and disdain that has long marked those who serve power without conscience. They underestimated her, and that miscalculation was about to become their undoing. Their arrogance was compounded by a sense of historical entitlement. They had grown accustomed to courts swayed by spectacle rather than substance, to hearings dominated by protocol over principle. They relied on influence, past accolades, and intimidation to carry weight where logic or justice might falter. And yet here they faced someone who refused to perform for applause or succumb to the politics of fear. Jasmine Crockett's presence disrupted their rhythm, challenged their assumptions, and exposed a truth they had long avoided acknowledging. Authority rooted in integrity demanded a different respect, one they were unprepared to command. The tension between history and the present was palpable. Each member of the opposition brought their own story of privilege and misstep, yet together they formed a collective wall of resistance. They were, in their own way, villains of comfort, entrenched in systems that rewarded pretense over action, optics over substance. Their pasts, though often glossed over by headlines and press releases, were now shadows looming in the room, unspoken but understood. Every smirk, every calculated glance, every whispered aside served as a reminder of how long they had been unchallenged, and how rare it was to see someone unafraid of standing in the light of scrutiny. And yet, for all their preparation and power, they failed to grasp one fundamental truth. Arrogance cannot outlast preparation. Hypocrisy cannot survive integrity, and entitlement cannot overshadow earned respect. Each of their moves, calculated and confident, carried the weight of a misjudgment they had yet to realize. Their world of controlled narratives and strategic posturing was about to collide with a force they could not manipulate, charm, or intimidate, but the hero had spent years preparing for exactly this challenge. Jasmine Crockett's story was one written in quiet determination, forged through long nights, tireless effort, and an unwavering commitment to justice. She had not arrived at this courtroom moment by accident. It was the culmination of years spent navigating the complexities of law, public service, and personal sacrifice. From the beginning, she understood that leadership demanded more than ambition. It demanded courage, empathy, and the resilience to persist when the world doubted you at every turn. Born into a world that often overlooked voices like hers, Crockett learned early that perseverance was not optional. She faced obstacles that tested both her intellect and her character. The skepticism of mentors who questioned whether she could thrive in a male-dominated, heavily politicized environment, the subtle biases that surfaced in academic settings, and the societal expectations that tried to define limits for her before she had even begun. Each challenge, however, became a stepping stone rather than a barrier. She met doubt with preparation, criticism with diligence, and systemic hurdles with a strategic mind honed through years of study and practice. Her legal career became a battlefield of both intellect and morality. In every case she took on, Crockett prioritized justice over convenience, principle over optics. She navigated high-profile trials with a meticulous attention to detail, ensuring that her arguments were airtight and her advocacy unassailable. She did not merely argue cases. She fought for the people whose voices were often silenced, championing those whose struggles were overlooked in the bureaucratic machinery of power. Every courtroom became a stage for integrity, a proving ground for her commitment to fairness and a testament to her unwavering moral compass. But the journey was not without personal cost. Crockett made sacrifices that few would ever see or understand. Long nights away from family, endless hours poring over legal documents, and moments when exhaustion threatened to break her resolve. She endured criticism from those who misread her ambition as arrogance, whispers that questioned her dedication, and attempts to diminish her achievements because they challenged entrenched norms. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast, guided by a vision of leadership that was inclusive, courageous, and unwaveringly ethical. Her rise to prominence was both deliberate and undeniable. Colleagues who once underestimated her began to recognize her insight, her ability to synthesize complex issues, and her talent for translating policy into real-world impact. Communities that had long felt unheard found in her a voice that not only represented them but amplified their concerns with clarity and conviction. Her leadership was not performative. It was lived, earned, and felt by those who witnessed her unwavering commitment to justice. Crockett's resilience extended beyond professional arenas. She navigated personal trials with grace, never allowing setbacks to define her, and consistently used her experiences to inform her approach to policy and advocacy. Her empathy, rooted in lived experience, allowed her to connect with individuals across social, economic, and cultural divides. This authenticity became her strength, a lens through which she approached every challenge, and a guiding principle that shaped her interactions in and out of the courtroom. Through it all, Crockett's moral clarity remained unshaken. She understood that leadership was not about dominance or spectacle. It was about service, vision, and courage under scrutiny. Each obstacle she overcame reinforced her understanding of justice. Each criticism sharpened her resolve, and each victory, however quiet, validated the path she had chosen. Her journey was not merely a personal ascent, but a testament to what could be achieved when talent, preparation, and unwavering ethics converged. And so, when she stepped into the courtroom that day, poised and ready, it was not merely another appearance. It was the manifestation of a lifetime of preparation, struggle, and triumph. Every argument she would make, every glance she would share, every pause she would take carried the weight of years of dedication, trials overcome, and a vision of leadership rooted in integrity and courage. All of these struggles had led to this defining courtroom moment. The atmosphere in the courtroom thickened with anticipation, each passing second amplifying the unspoken tension. Opponents began their assault, not with overt hostility but with sharp, calculated questions, their words designed to unsettle, to sow doubt in the minds of those watching. They questioned her judgment, her decisions, even her ability to navigate the complex legal and political terrain of the moment. Each inquiry was layered with insinuation, a subtle attempt to undermine the hero without breaking decorum. Yet Crockett remained unmoved, her posture unwavering, her voice steady, her calmness a stark contrast to the flustered energy radiating from her challengers. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the growing friction as murmurs rippled through the room. Supporters shifted in their seats, sensing the intensity, the quiet urgency of every exchange. Opponents sought to exploit any pause, any flicker of hesitation, but Crockett's eyes betrayed nothing. No doubt, no fear, only unwavering focus. She answered each challenge with clarity and precision, transforming their attacks into demonstrations of her preparedness and expertise. Every rebuttal was measured, almost surgical, dismantling assumptions and exposing the fragility beneath their confident facades. Body language became a battlefield. A senator, arms crossed, leaned slightly forward, his brow furrowed in frustration as Crockett sidestepped his traps with practiced ease. The lead attorney, attempting to press an advantage, spoke faster, his tone sharper, trying to corner her into a misstep. But Crockett's composure rendered their tactics ineffective. Even subtle cues, the way she held her hands, the calm cadence of her speech, commanded attention, drawing eyes and respect from those who had come to witness conflict, not mastery. Every pause, every deliberate breath became a moment of suspense. The courtroom seemed to contract around her, time stretching in the intensity of the exchange. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, aware that history was unfolding in real time. Constituents in the gallery exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others holding their breath in anxious anticipation. The contrast was undeniable. Arrogance meeting preparation, bravado meeting integrity, all within the silent language of posture, gaze, and measured speech. Opponents escalated their strategy, injecting sharper critiques and veiled accusations, but with every volley, Crockett's authority only grew. The energy in the room shifted subtly. Whispers of doubt now traveled in the opposite direction. Those who had come expecting spectacle were now captivated by the hero's unwavering focus, her ability to convert pressure into presence. It was as if the courtroom itself had taken sides, the air vibrating with the tension of a narrative about to reach its apex. The crescendo of conflict was palpable. Each word from her challengers hit like a spark against steel, but Crockett remained unyielding, her calm radiating confidence. Murmurs swelled into audible reactions. Eyes widened, jaws clenched, and the room collectively held its breath. Every observer sensed that something decisive was imminent, and then Judge Stephen leaned forward, ready to speak, and the room went silent. Jasmine Crockett took a measured breath, the kind that carries the weight of preparation, clarity, and unshakable confidence. The courtroom, thick with tension, seemed to contract around her presence. All eyes were fixed, not on the opposition, not on the judge, but on her, poised, unflinching, a figure of calm authority in a storm of provocation. Every whispered attempt to unsettle her, every veiled challenge hurled by her detractors, now met a force they could neither anticipate nor counter. She began slowly, each word deliberate, each sentence measured with precision. Her opening statement was not loud, not theatrical. It was rooted in fact, law, and moral clarity. She dissected every insinuation, addressed every critique, and reframed every attempt to undermine her as a reflection of the opposition's misjudgment rather than her inadequacy. There was a rhythm to her delivery, a cadence that commanded attention, drawing the listeners into the logic of her argument while simultaneously reinforcing her credibility. The opposition, once confident, now found themselves floundering under the weight of her poise. With each point, Crockett layered her arguments with undeniable evidence. She cited precedents, highlighted procedural accuracy, and drew on years of meticulous preparation to dismantle each claim systematically. Yet what set her apart was not just the precision of her legal mind. It was the moral authority embedded in every statement. She spoke with the weight of someone who had dedicated her life to service, whose decisions were informed by empathy, experience, and unwavering ethical standards. Her words carried the quiet power of truth, a force that illuminated the deficiencies in her opponent's attacks and exposed the hollowness of their posturing. The courtroom reacted almost viscerally. Gasps punctuated her sentences, subtle nods of approval spread through the gallery, and murmurs of recognition rippled like a current across the benches. Even the most skeptical spectators could not help but acknowledge the mastery with which she commanded the room. Opponents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their confidence visibly eroding as Crockett's logic and integrity cut through the noise of their bluster. They had entered the courtroom expecting spectacle, perhaps even intimidation, but instead they faced a demonstration of disciplined intellect and moral clarity, a performance they could not match. Then came the moment that transformed authority into inspiration. Crockett paused, allowing the silence to hang, pregnant with expectation. She looked directly at Judge Stephen, her gaze unwavering, and articulated the principles at the core of her leadership: fairness, accountability, and service to the people. It was not a declaration of triumph over her opponents, but a statement of commitment to a higher purpose, one that transcended politics, ego, or fleeting power. The resonance of her words was almost tangible, filling the room with an energy that transcended decorum and touched something deeper in every listener. Judge Stephen, himself composed and measured, could not contain the acknowledgement any longer. Leaning forward slightly, his tone deliberate and unambiguous, he commended Crockett's leadership publicly. "In all my years, I have rarely witnessed such preparation, clarity, and unwavering commitment. This is the leadership our system needs," he declared. The weight of his words landed like a verdict, not of judgment, but of recognition, validation, and respect. The courtroom reacted instantaneously. A collective intake of breath, a ripple of astonishment, and a surge of admiration that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Every subtle reaction amplified the impact. Colleagues who had once doubted her nodded subtly, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of her mastery. Opponents, visibly rattled, could do little beyond exchange frustrated glances, the veneer of control slipping away as the truth of Crockett's authority became undeniable. The gallery leaned forward, captivated not just by the legal precision she displayed, but by the quiet power of her presence, the kind of force that commands respect without demanding it, that persuades without theatrics, that inspires without proclamation. Crockett continued, weaving her factual rebuttals seamlessly with appeals to justice and integrity. Every objection, every attempted dig, every insinuation against her character or judgment was met with reasoned clarity and ethical conviction. She illuminated not just the deficiencies in her opponent's arguments, but the broader significance of the moment. Leadership rooted in moral clarity, diligence, and courage cannot be overshadowed by arrogance, intimidation, or pretense. In that room, the contrast between hero and antagonists had never been clearer. The audience felt it deeply. Journalists scribbled furiously, not merely recording events, but witnessing a demonstration of excellence, integrity, and courage that demanded acknowledgement. Constituents exchanged glances, some with tears of pride, others with the quiet thrill of validation. Realizing that this was not a personal victory, it was emblematic of what leadership could and should look like. Every syllable Crockett spoke was a reinforcement of hope, a beacon of possibility in a system often clouded by cynicism and entitlement. As her delivery reached its apex, Crockett allowed a final measured pause. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence filled with recognition, awe, and an unspoken understanding that this was a defining moment. Then, with a quiet yet commanding conclusion, she left no room for doubt. Her intellect, integrity, and composure had triumphed, leaving the opposition humbled, the spectators inspired, and the principles she championed undeniably affirmed. And as her words echoed, social media began to erupt and the impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. The moment Crockett's words landed in the courtroom, the impact was immediate, but the reverberations extended far beyond those walls. Within minutes, smartphones lit up across the country. Tweets began to pour in, each one a mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief. Hashtags like Crockett leads, justice in action, and leadership with integrity trended within the hour, dominating feeds and trending charts alike. Memes captured her calm, poised expression mid-response, juxtaposed against the stunned faces of her opponents, quickly becoming symbols of resilience and moral authority. The online world had collectively paused to acknowledge the undeniable truth. Leadership grounded in integrity commands attention and respect. News outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding narrative, posting clips and analyses that dissected every word of Crockett's performance. Political commentators and legal experts debated her strategy, marveling at her meticulous preparation and the ease with which she diffused attacks while reinforcing her authority. Social media threads buzzed with admiration, filled with citizens recounting personal stories of how Crockett's leadership resonated with their experiences. Immigrant communities, progressive activists, and everyday Americans alike flooded the platforms with gratitude and pride. celebrating someone who reflected the values of fairness, resilience, and courage. Even in professional circles, her impact was palpable. Colleagues and allies sent messages of respect, acknowledging the precision and moral clarity she had brought to the courtroom. Fellow legislators highlighted her poise as an example of principled leadership, often contrasting her approach with the self-interest and arrogance they had witnessed in others. Law firms and advocacy organizations praised her not only for her legal skill, but for the example she set. That expertise, empathy, and integrity could coexist and even dominate in high-stakes arenas. The cultural resonance was equally profound. Memes and commentary became shorthand for larger conversations about leadership, justice, and accountability. Animated graphics circulated showing Crockett standing tall against a sea of bewildered opponents, captions emphasizing how preparation and morality could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. Opinion columns celebrated the moment as more than a legal victory. It was a defining illustration of American ideals in action, a reminder that dedication and ethics could still command the spotlight in a world often distracted by theatrics and spectacle. Political figures who had previously dismissed Crockett's influence now spoke in measured tones, acknowledging her authority and the power of her example. Local and national leaders shared clips, praising her ability to rise above the noise and advocate for truth, fairness, and ethical governance. It was a rare moment in which competence and moral clarity were lauded across the spectrum, drawing admiration even from those who did not align fully with her policies. The citizen response was equally remarkable. Grassroots movements, community groups, and advocacy organizations amplified the narrative, framing Crockett's leadership as a rallying point for broader societal change. Young voters, historically disengaged, expressed renewed hope in political participation, seeing in her example a reflection of possibility and agency. The courtroom moment had ignited conversations across living rooms, town halls, and online forums, inspiring debates about what leadership could and should look like in a modern, diverse democracy. Within hours, Crockett's triumph became a symbol. It wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about what courage, preparation, and moral clarity could achieve when applied relentlessly. Supporters across the country felt a surge of collective pride, the kind that happens when someone embodies values they hold dear, the kind that motivates engagement, advocacy, and action. In offices, homes, and schools, conversations shifted from cynicism to possibility, the story of her composure and brilliance spreading like wildfire. Yet beyond the applause, a deeper lesson was waiting to be realized. In the quiet that followed the courtroom storm, Jasmine Crockett's presence remained unshaken, a beacon of integrity and resolve. The applause, the gasps, the trending hashtags, all of it was fleeting compared to the deeper truth she embodied. That leadership is not measured by spectacle, by applause, or by fleeting victories, but by the courage to act with clarity, compassion, and principle, even when every force around you pushes for compromise, distraction, or conformity. Crockett reframed the moment not as personal triumph, but as a reflection of what true service requires. She reminded herself and the nation that justice is not given. It is earned, fought for, and defended with unwavering dedication. Each challenge she faced, every critic who sought to destabilize her, was a test of resilience and an opportunity to demonstrate that ethical, moral leadership could prevail even in a world predisposed to cynicism. She had not merely defended her position in the courtroom, she had illuminated a pathway forward, showing that steadfastness under pressure is the essence of authentic authority. Her journey became a mirror for all who watched. Immigrant communities saw in her example that identity, resilience, and determination could translate into influence and change. Young leaders saw that preparation and integrity outweigh intimidation and theatrics. Citizens everywhere felt validated, their hopes for fairness, equity, and principled governance reflected in the calm, commanding presence of one who refused to bend under pressure. Crockett's actions reminded the public that leadership grounded in dignity, courage, and empathy could reshape the expectations of power itself. The courtroom drama, reframed through her lens, became a universal lesson. It was a lesson that values matter more than votes, that ethical clarity triumphs over arrogance, and that service to the public is the highest calling of anyone in a position to act. She showed that even when opponents are loud, when stakes are high, and when the world watches, it is possible to respond with intelligence, composure, and moral certainty. The moment became less about a single confrontation and more about the enduring principles that guide society forward: justice, accountability, and the courage to stand firm in one's convictions. Crockett's reflection extended beyond legal arguments or political debates. It touched the very human need to see integrity in action, to witness courage under fire, and to feel that the fight for fairness is neither abstract nor unattainable. Her example was proof that every person, regardless of background, identity, or circumstance, could assert their voice, defend their values, and inspire change. It was a call to action, quiet yet compelling, urging the public to recognize that leadership is a shared responsibility, cultivated not through self-interest, but through commitment to something larger than oneself. As the echoes of recognition faded, the moral clarity of the moment settled in. Crockett's composure and principled stance transformed a courtroom confrontation into a story of resilience and vision, a story that would ripple through communities, conversations, and minds long after the cameras were turned off. The lesson was unmistakable. True leadership is not a performance, it is a reflection of the courage, consistency, and dignity with which one meets every challenge, especially when the world is watching. This is what it means to lead with dignity, no matter the Jasmine Crockett's moment in the courtroom was more than a headline. It was a testament to what leadership grounded in integrity, courage, and preparation can achieve. Judge Stevens' public acknowledgement was not simply a nod to one person's excellence. It was a symbol of the power of steadfast moral clarity in a world too often swayed by spectacle, ego, or convenience. Every gesture, every word, every calculated pause in that room became an inspiration for anyone watching, proof that persistence, resilience, and ethical conviction are forces that can reshape outcomes and redefine what it means to lead. Her leadership resonates far beyond the courthouse walls. Citizens, activists, and public servants alike can look at Crockett's example and see the blueprint for impactful action. Prepare diligently, act decisively, and remain unwavering in your principles, even when opposition is fierce. It is a reminder that every challenge faced with courage and clarity carries the potential to inspire others, spark conversation, and ignite change. Now, the story doesn't end with this video. It continues with you. Reflect on your own voice, your own role in your community, and the ways you can lead with integrity, even in the face of doubt or adversity. Share this story with friends, family, and colleagues to spread the example of courage and moral clarity. Comment your thoughts, your inspirations, and the ways Crockett's leadership motivates you to act. Join the conversation, amplify the message, and become part of a movement that values justice, dignity, and service above all else. Remember, moments like this remind us that leadership is not inherited or granted. It is earned, demonstrated, and shared. Be bold, be prepared, stand firm, and let the world see what principled courage truly looks like.